Welcome back to the Black Minutes Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Weaver, and I'm here with my other host.
Nate Bird, happy to be on the show as always.
Yes, what a wonderful day. I have the Minutes Moment today, and I'm excited to highlight this person because I actually found them on TikTok through a video that was on my For You page, which is, just very fitting for us and what we have done and how we got started. But it's about a girl named Madison Lawson, um, and she is a disabilities advocate. Um, and she, in the video that was featured on my For You page, it was about her experience traveling in her wheelchair across the United States because she lives in St. Louis, but she essentially is an advocate. She's always going to DC to, help with laws and speak out on different things. And so every time that she's traveled this year, which has been 5 times, every single time that she's traveled, her wheelchair has been damaged.
Wow.
So exactly, and those wheelchairs are expensive because she has a rare form of a muscular disorder, which causes progressive muscle loss throughout the body, and in some cases leading to lung failure. So um, she has use of her hands, but she needs there's like a kind of like a remote control on her wheelchair that allows her to move around and whatnot. And in the video, that had been damaged. So she in the video also because she has her muscles aren't a use, she needs people to assist her in and out of her seat on an airplane as well. So the video just really went through her experience on an airplane, and it really touched me because I never thought about what that experience is like for someone who has that type of disability traveling on an airplane, right? I'm able bodied. I'm so privileged in that way. Like, I run through the airport basically. Ask anyone who travels with me. They're tired of my quick walks. And she used to get to the airport. She said she gets there normally 3 hours early to make it through TSA because then her wheelchair has to go through security. Just like all these pieces, and then somebody has to the she has to go on the airplane first because then someone has to physically pick her up and put her in the seat. It's a great video, and really, so I wanted to know more about her, and she has written articles for Teen Vogue, Glamour magazine, and Allure,
Oh
and
wow.
Regular Vogue, highlighting her experience. Um, and she also hosts a podcast that's award winning. I didn't even know this.
Really?
Yeah, and it's called The Obvious Question, in which she talks about assumptions and misconceptions that people have about people with disabilities. So I really would love to hear her speak somewhere because I was looking at her speaker fee. So I'm gonna see if my job can bring her in for something because she seems really really powerful as well as not just through her work that she's doing and through her own podcast and through writing. She's also working with she works with the New America's Education Policy Program and really working to helping people to understand how people with disabilities navigate schooling across America. And so she really just shares about her experiences and is trying to bring more awareness to the issues. And so she's also a journalist, so that's why she writes a lot. She got her BA from the University of Missouri in journalism, and yeah, so it's just she's really cool, and I'm gonna share the video in our notes so that everyone else can go see it. Um, but I think it's important just because I'm pretty sure July is Disability Pride Month, and I think it's an issue that needs more attention, and people need to be advocating for it even more than they are. As someone who's able-bodied, I'm not even privy to what that community experiences, and learning about her and what she does, it's really helped me to see my blind spots and how I can obviously always be working towards making things more equitable for other people. And just it helped me to think about how many experiences we have every single day that are just not accessible for people with physical limitations. Um, so many places don't even have a door to open for someone who is in a wheelchair. things like that. And it's crazy to think that people who live in a wheelchair who are in wheelchairs have to think about so much more, just existing as a person. Something as simple as like where my partner lives, they don't even have like one of the doors doesn't have like one of the doors you have to go through doesn't have a button. And I remember I noticed that one time, and I've just been thinking about it more. Like if someone moved in who needed that, they would have to do something for them or figure some way out. And so it's just a good reminder that inclusion looks so different and means so many different things, and we still have work to do as a society. So shout out to Megan for or Madison, sorry, for fighting for rights and continuing to use her voice and her experience. Um, just because her condition could lead to death, that's a possibility, and she's using her life to bring awareness through her own experiences, which that's the same space we're in. So I just have to commend somebody who's using their platform to share and constantly putting herself in the line of fire as well, because going on social media, having a podcast, there's ignorant people out there who are going to say something probably stupid, um, and I just know how tiring that can be as someone who does similar things. And so I just commend it because that is um, already a lot on top of having a disability. So I recommend you guys. I'll put all her social medias and stuff in the notes as well for you guys to go in and learn more about her and the things that she's shared. So
Absolutely. I'm gonna have to add her podcast to my repertoire. You said it's called The Obvious Question.
mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm
And
gonna
so I
have to
think
check
that's
that out.
yeah, and I like it. That's such like I haven't listened to it, but I want to. It just makes sense that someone who has a disability is gonna answer those awkward questions that we might be afraid to ask, the same way that we hope that on Black Menaces we get our podcast that we answer questions for people they might have about racial things. So
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm excited to learn more about that. Before we go any farther, though, I realized we forgot to introduce our
oh
guest.
my gosh, you're so right.
We have an incredible guest on
Wow.
this week. We need to introduce expeditiously. So
Yes.
we're going to jump right into it. So, Sean Wilson is the organizing director at dream.org. As someone with 17 years of lived experience and direct involvement with the criminal legal system, Sean brings an advantage and insight into the system he believes to be broken and in need of reform. Before joining the Dream Corps Justice Team, Sean was the ACLU of Wisconsin's Smart Justice Campaign Manager, where he managed the campaign to reform probation and parole. In addition, he also serves as a commissioner on the governor's Juvenile Justice Commission, a state advisory group that it advises the a state advisory group that advises the Department of Justice on its juvenile justice programs and funding decisions, and serves as an independent forum to discuss juvenile justice policy issues. Man, Sean, you're gonna kill me with these alliterations, man. Recently featured in the HBO documentary Growing Up Milwaukee, which deals with the daily dilemma of growing up Black and avoiding becoming just another statistic, Sean shares his experience with the justice system. A sought after presenter with a dynamic story of redemption, Sean has been invited to present for organizations, colleges, and universities throughout the country. Positioned to influence real reform and bring an end to mass incarceration and excessive sentences, Sean's goal is to undo the unjust policies and legislation that has caused so much harm. He is committed to impacting change and seeing the justice system move forward or move from punitive practices to restorative actions that heal our communities. Living by simple quote Living by a simple quote by Frederick Douglass that says, "If there is no struggle, there is no progress." After experiencing his fair share of struggle, Sean is committed to progress. Mr. Sean Wilson, please say hello to our audience.
Hello, hello. Thank you all for having me. I'm excited to be here and have this conversation with you all.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And we're looking forward to it. You have an amazing story, just from the little bit that we've been able to learn, and we're excited to learn more from you. So just jumping right into it, Sean, tell us a little bit about what inspired you to get into social justice reform. Just kind of briefly tell us your story.
Absolutely. So, as you all mentioned, my name is Sean Wilson, organizing director for Dream.org Justice Program. But prior to being the organizing director at Dream.org, I was also the campaign manager, organizer at the ACLU of Wisconsin. Prior to that, I was a consultant for an organization in Wisconsin called Youth Justice Milwaukee. Prior to that, I was known by the Wisconsin Department of Corrections as 403301. Inmate Sean Wilson. Prior to my disappearance in captivity for a period of 17 years, I was a son, I was a brother, I was a nephew, I was a little black boy growing up in America trying to figure it out. But as a result of poor decision making coupled with peer pressure, I found myself landed in Wisconsin Department of Corrections for a period of 17 years. Um, I am that little black boy who everyone has in their family that has aspirations to be the next Deion Sanders, the next Russell Wilson, the next um, LeBron James, the next Michael Johnson, whatever you call it. I was that young black boy that had aspirations, that had hopes, that had dreams. And in the words of Langston Hughes, who asks, what happens to a dream deferred? Does it shrivel up and dry, or does it explode? I am someone who is directly impacted by the criminal legal system here in America. My dream was in fact deferred. It did not shrivel up and dry. Instead, it was cultivated. And now it is to a certain extent exploding onto the airways, onto print media, onto social media, and onto the halls of universities and the halls of Congress and state houses all over this country. As I travel this country, building relationships with individuals who are directly impacted by the criminal legal system, as I build relationships with elected officials and policymakers all across this country to give them a better understanding of what the carceral system is and what it does to Black and brown communities, and what it does to Black boys in particular. I am your listening audience. I am someone who gave in to indiscretion. I am someone who sat down for a period of time, and in that period of time, I engaged in a sabbatical, so to speak, of healing, of awakening, of coming to the realization of what my responsibility is to myself, first and foremost, to my community, to my family, and to the world as a whole. And so now I am living out the aspirations that I had as a 17-year-old Black boy, but in the form of a social justice advocate, in opposed to a athlete or a track star, because that was the trajectory that I was on. But as a result of my indiscretion, I found myself in Wisconsin's Department of Corrections for a period of 17 years, and realized that was not life for me. I realized that I had to begin to, do the necessary work that will prepare me for my reintegration back into society, and that's what I did. That's what I did, and here I am, sitting before you both in your audience, your listening audience, as a father, as a husband,
Yes,
as
sir.
a brother, community member, and
Come on.
someone who is committed to dismantling and disrupting all systems that is intent on oppressing all peoples, no matter what their race, creed, background, ethnicity, or experience. I am committed to disrupting those systems that prevent us from living our truest potential. And I'll pause there.
Love it. Beautiful. That was A word. I feel like I was at church right there for a second. Loved it. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So I have a question for you. While you were in the criminal legal system, and I noticed that seems like a very intentional choice of words rather than calling it the justice system. What were some things that you learned and observed, both about yourself and about the system that you were in, that kind of led you to build upon that dream deferred once you left that?
Well, one of the first things that I learned upon entrance into this system was that everyone that I was surrounded by looked just like me. Everyone that I was surrounded by was within the same age range of 16 to 21. And what I realized is that this wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't, something that was existing by chance. I realized that this was systematically put in place. And what I mean by that is that we are in a country that once upon a time held individuals that look like you and I in chattel slavery, where we worked from can see to can't see and were considered 3/5 of a human. And what I realized is that the parallels between chattel slavery and what they call mass incarceration was very striking. The parallels were very striking. And once I came to the realization of how striking those parallels were, I realized that the system, or not even the system, what I realized was slavery never left us. Slavery was never abolished. The emancipation never really set freedom to enslave Black people. What the Emancipation, the Proclamation did was it created a more sophisticated version of chattel slavery and called it initially convict leasing. It put in place policies and laws, Black codes that automatically criminalize Black people for not being employed, for not having housing, for the most minuscule offense. Black people were immediately returned to slavery. And so, in understanding that this current system that we find ourselves faced with, that is called mass incarceration, that is called criminal legal system, what I realized was that this is a continuum of what was 100+ years ago. And once I came to that realization, I began to ask the question, how do I disrupt this system? How do I dismantle this system? How do I expose this system? And so I did everything in my power over 17 years to equip myself with the tools and the resources that I needed to come home and begin to unpack what this system really is for the average American. Not Black American, not white American, not Asian American, just Americans whose tax dollars are going towards caging human beings, because it costs anywhere from $30,000 to upwards of $250,000 to cage a human being in a carceral setting. And so what elected officials and policymakers are saying to the American public is, we prefer to spend $30,000+ on caging an individual in something that is likened to a closet than we are to addressing the root cause of the problem that has landed them in a carceral or correctional setting. And so they're more inclined to put us in a sensory depriving environment than getting us access to mental health treatment, getting us access to substance abuse treatment, getting us access to providers that helps us walk through the trauma that we are dealing with. And opposed to doing those things, they are committed to putting us in an environment that exacerbates our trauma, putting us in an environment that incapacitates us, in opposed to rehabilitating us.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah. Okay. I have a follow-up to that kind of little. So you're talking about like the trauma that obviously Black people experience, and like I know that through experience. But I want you to specifically talk about what are some of the challenges that Black people overall face that make us more vulnerable to being incarcerated, right? Because of some of the things you discussed. But what does that look like, and what did that look like maybe for you, or just in your experiences with the people that you met? Just because I know that those are unique to our community.
I would say that, and thank you for that question. I think one of the main drivers of Black people into the carceral system is instability. And what I mean by that is that we grow up in households that are unstable. We grew up in households that may have just the father, or it may just have the mother. Or in those scenarios, you have the mother who is, working a 9 to 5, is not actively present in their children's lives because they're trying to make sure that a roof is over their heads and that food is on their table and clothes are on their back. And so as a result of mothers having to sacrifice their presence in their children's life, what is created in those scenarios is a invitation to the streets to come in and raise your children. What is created is a lack of supervision. And I will talk about my own experience, for example, where my grandmother, I was raised by my grandmother and my grandfather because my mother was experiencing life, but my grandmother wanted to ensure that I had a relationship with my mother. And so during the summer months, she allowed me to go and spend those moments with my mother so that we will have a relationship and we can begin to repair, restore, and heal from that distance that was created from birth to the age of 13, 14, 15, and onwards. But what my grandmother didn't know was that my mother was very lackadaisical in her supervision of me. And as a result of her being lax in her supervision of me, the streets grabbed a hold of me and said, "Come here, I'll be your father. I'll show you how a man should conduct himself. I'll show you how to go about securing a living for yourself." And although I saw my grandfather and my grandmother making an honest living, working 9 to 5 and putting us in the category of middle class and keeping a roof over our head and clothes on our back and food on the table, and allowing us to really enjoy, what many would consider the American dream. Although they did those things, there was a counter narrative that I was exposed to that as a young person, I gravitated to, because I was thinking, why would I work a 9 to 5 for $1,000 a week or $2,000 a week when I can make $1,000, $2,000 in an hour.
Yeah.
And so I was more inclined to the street life than I was making an honest living. And I went to a school where I had academic scholarships. I had athletic scholarships at my disposal. I had so many opportunities placed at my foot, but I squandered those opportunities because the street life was more appealing than that which they call a honest living. And so what is the biggest contributor to the carceral system from the Black community is a unstable household. So unstable households, whenever you have an unstable household, the likelihood of that household or some individuals within that household finding themselves in the carceral setting is very high. It's very high for individuals in an unstable environment to find themselves in a carceral setting. And so I would say that is one of the biggest contributor to the Department of Corrections in our criminal legal system. The biggest funnel, I should say, the biggest funnel to the criminal legal system.
Yeah.
Okay. So with that, I have a follow-up question to that. So with dealing with, you talked about how the street was very attractive, right? Or the streets were kind of calling to you, so to speak. You talked about how it was much easier to make money in the streets, make $1,000 in an hour as opposed to making $1,000 in a week. So how do you dissuade young men and young women from being called to that sort of lifestyle? How do you dissuade them from pursuing those things to pursue things that might be better for them long term? Because in the short term, making that money or being out there doing those things is very beneficial. But in the long term, how do you dissuade somebody from taking advantage of that in order to further themselves?
Absolutely. One of the greatest joys and privileges I have is that of a mentor. I have the opportunity to share my story, and that's what I use to dissuade young Black and brown boys and girls from going down the path that I went down. I use my story often. And not only do I use my story, but what I communicate to young people is that I bump my head. You know what I mean? And oftentimes I tell young people, hey, bump your head against that wall. Like, this is like an activity that I'll do in like a group setting. I'll have all of the young men and women in the room stand up and I'll say, hey, go to that wall, hit your head up against that wall. And when they do that, I ask, how does that feel? It hurts, right? Absolutely, it hurts. So what I'm saying to you is that you don't have to bump your head, because guess what? I did that for you. So what I want you to do is close your eyes. I want you to listen. I want you to vicariously live through my story and let my story be a deterrent for you from going down the path that you're on. Let my story make you say to yourself that I don't want to experience what he experienced. One, because he experienced it for me. And two, because I don't really think that I can live for 17 years in a cell 24/7 where I'm only allowed to come out of my cell for 1 hour a day for recreation and then 3 times a day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I'm not willing to live my life where I have to shower nude in the presence of other people. I'm not willing to have to wear the same green uniform, the same green uniform over and over. I'm not willing to someone telling me to go to sleep, to wake up, to this is when you eat. I'm not willing to go through those things. And so I need to make an adjustment in my life. And so I use my story in hopes that that deters young Black and brown boys and girls from going down that path, because the greatest influencer of our young people are their peers. And so as parents, and that's something that I'm realizing as a father myself of a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, is that I have to make sure that I am a active presence in my children's life, and not only an active presence, but I'm having dialogue with them. I am challenging the statements that come out of their mouth. I am challenging the behaviors that they display to understand, where is it coming from? Why are you doing those things? And if they are doing these things because they seen their friends do them, then guess what? Let's disrupt that immediately, because I don't want you to do things because your friends are doing them. I want you to do them because you sincerely want to do them, because you understand the repercussions behind every action and statement that you make. That's what I impart into my children. That's what I impart to the young people who I have the privilege and honor to speak to. And that is what we need more of in the Black community. We need Black men, Black women challenging our youth about their mode of thinking, their behavior that they're engaged in, and ask them, like, where's this coming from? Like, why are you doing these things? And often the response is going to be social media, hip hop, the movies, TikTok, all of these platforms that has no moral compass whatsoever is what is influencing and guiding our children. And so as parents, we have to be a little bit more involved in our children's lives, and we have to disrupt those invasions of the social media, the invasion of friends and associates that they happen to have contact with. Like, we have to disrupt that, because if we don't disrupt that, we're going to get a knock at our door from law enforcement with a warrant for our child. We're going to get a knock at the door from law enforcement with news that our child has perished. We're going to get a knock at our door from a friend or a family member of a friend saying that our child has met their demise. And so to prevent those things from happening, we as parents have to be actively involved in our children's lives and asking the pertinent questions that need to be asked of them.
Yeah. And
I love that.
Highlighting what you were saying earlier about what makes Black people vulnerable, or black men, or you in particular, just because of other systematic issues, the way that Black households operate, it's not ideal. It's not sometimes the best for opportunities where parents can intervene, right? And it's very challenging, because if you don't have, both parents at home, it's hard to have an opportunity where your parents are going to have the space and time to be asking you those questions, to be involved in that way. And there's other challenges that impacted why Black families have more, single mother household and whatnot, that impacted our community specifically, which also has to do with incarceration and drugs back in the day. But that's something I think about a lot. Like, I had a single mom who, she was tired. She didn't have time to sit and ask me about my feelings or ask me about what was going on. And I had a community through my church that really supported me, not just me, but also all of my siblings, that, kind of was able to intervene. And I had other people in my life that were able to be that person surrogately when my parents weren't able to show up in the ways that they might have wanted to, right? But for obviously generational trauma and other systematic issues that didn't allow for even my mom to show up or my dad to show up in the way that they wanted.
Absolutely. And I mean, just think about it. You have the African proverb that talks about it takes a village to raise a child. Like, we're communal people. Black people, we're communal people. And so it really takes the village to raise little Black boys and girls. And when you look back at our history, we come from an era where, I've gotten whoopings by neighbors. I've gotten whoopings by, older folks on my block because they saw me doing something that I had no business doing. And they called me right over there and they went upside my head, and they snatched me up and said, you know better, and you know that your mother wouldn't approve of this. You know that your grandfather or your grandmother wouldn't approve of this. What are you doing? We don't have that anymore. What we have is our people, older people, our elders are afraid of our youth because our youth have no respect for the elders. Like, we have no respect at all. And so the elders aren't even going to say anything. And the reason I say that they're not going to say anything is because as someone, I'm a 40-year-old man, and my wife and I, we had went to a mall about 3 months ago, and there were some young men, they were standing outside of a car. And this is in a city where, stolen cars are very prevalent. And so my wife saw them, and my wife was like, I wonder what they are up to. Immediately, she was very suspicious of them because they were standing outside of a vehicle, looking into the vehicle, and she didn't know what they were up to. And so as she were getting our children out of the vehicle, because, hey, I have no fear. Like, I'm committed to the liberation of Black people at whatever cost. So many people have come before us and they've sacrificed their life for the liberation of Black people. I love Black people. I love myself. And I understand that I was removed from my community for 17 years, which impacted the forward progress of my community because there was a lack of brain trust contribution there. And so I walked up to these young men and I said, hey, man, I don't know who car this is. I don't know if it's a relative of yours, but I just want you to know, as someone who is on the outside looking in, you both look very suspicious. And to prevent someone from calling law enforcement and law enforcement pulling up and immediately, considering you all a threat, immediately considering the worst of you all, I would suggest or encourage you all to go into the mall, walk around, but don't stand around this vehicle and look into the vehicle. Do you know, is this your vehicle? Do you know who? Is this your parents' vehicle? And one of the young men said, yeah, this is my dad's vehicle. And I was like, are you able to get in? And they were like, no, he's in the mall. And I said, listen, little brother, why don't both of y'all go into the mall with your father and wait on him to come out to the car, in opposed to standing outside of the car, looking in the car, and presenting very suspiciously, because this cannot end well for the two of you. And the reason I'm saying this is because we were at a mall where a couple of years prior, 2 Black boys were shot down and killed by law enforcement in this mall. Mm-hmm. So there is a history of law enforcement responding and not only responding, but responding violently to young Black boys at this mall. There's a history of that. So to prevent you two from being the next victim of a police shooting, why don't you both go in and get with your father and wait on him to come out instead of, hovering around this car. And they went in, and that kind of assuaged, the feelings that I had. And my wife still was very suspicious, but her suspicion was assuaged as well when we saw the 2 young men with their father. And when I saw them, I nodded at them and said to them, like, hey, be safe and be mindful that as young Black boys in America, we are looked upon suspiciously no matter what we're doing. If we're just shooting the ball, if we're just walking down the street, we're looked upon in a suspicious fashion. And so be mindful of that whenever you are all out and about doing whatever it is that you're doing. And so I know that older folks aren't as inclined to do what I did, but we need more of that. But the reason why they don't do that is because this generation of young people do not respect our elders the way that my generation respected our elders.
Okay. Yeah, and I would say with that, that's probably a good thing in some ways and a bad thing in other ways, right? It's important.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's important to have respect to a certain point, but then at other times, this is kind of a conversation that's been talked about a little bit, but teaching people to have autonomy and teaching people to have respect for themselves before they have respect for other people. But that you being able to go up to those young men and kind of gauge the situation and be like, hey, in order to keep y'all safe, this is what needs to happen. That's important.
Yep.
And the fact that they were willing to listen to that, even though they might not have had your same perspective, is huge. So I'm glad that that's something that you were able to do. And you're right, that is something that we need more of. And I understand what you're saying about how that's not something that happens that often, because a lot of times defense or contention is the first reaction as opposed to respect or deference. So
Yep.
that's an interesting point for sure. I was going to ask, this kind of moves us forward a little bit in the narrative. But when you left the criminal legal system, what kind of discrimination or prejudice did you face, coming out of that system before you began your work with the ACLU and with Dream? You talked about, how just looking at those young men, they had the appearance of someone who was suspicious. So for you being a Black man coming out of the criminal system, how was that for you, and what kind of things did you have to overcome to get to where you are now?
The biggest hurdle that I had to get over, man, was discrimination within employment. You got to check that box, man. Have you ever been convicted of a felony? And I had to check that box. And as a result of checking that box, I never received a call back. And so I found myself going to staffing agencies a lot. And that's what allowed me to secure employment. But in the same vein of me, going to staffing agencies, I also had a spirit of entrepreneurialism, where I wanted to be my own boss. I didn't really want to work for anyone. And so while I was in prison, I used to tell guys that I was going to come home and I was going to start my own personal training business because I worked out daily. Insanely. I had an insane workout regimen. And so I was telling guys I was going to come home and become a personal trainer and open up my own gym. And ultimately, after door after door after door was slammed in my face as a result of me being a felon, I, embarked on the journey of being an entrepreneur and becoming a personal trainer. And so what I did, I started working for a large gym in Milwaukee, and I was able to learn the system around personal training. I did that for about 6-7 months, and then I quit and took a lot of the clients that I secured while I worked for this company with me, and I was able to give them a more reasonable price to train them, and that's what made them come with me. And so my the biggest thing that I faced was discrimination in the hiring process. But I had a great deal of family support. I had my sister, I had my brothers, I had my mother, my grandmother who raised me. My grandmother, 2 weeks prior to me coming home, my grandmother passed away. This was, of course, the woman who prevented my mother from having an abortion. This is the woman who came into my life and said, "This is my baby. I'm going to raise him as my own." This is the woman who spoiled me, who stuck a silver spoon in my mouth. This is the woman who did everything in her power to ensure that I would not go down a destructive path. But I failed her. I let her down. I didn't live up to the dreams the aspirations that she had for me. And so when I was getting ready to come home, I was looking forward to like just making her proud. I had all of these plans and all of these ideas. And when she died, like I really entered into a deep state of depression that I had to crawl out of, and recognize that I made a promise to her and I wanted to be true to that promise. And so, despite employers slamming the door in my face, I did everything in my power to make sure that I was able to take care of myself, that I was able to keep a roof over my head, that I was able to get from point A to point Z. And I began to share my story, and people were hearing my story, and it just pretty much took off from there. Yeah, man. Yeah, man. My grandmother had a lot, man. She had a lot of, parents, man. Parents have a lot of hopes and dreams for their children.
Mhm.
And there's no different, man, with my grandmother, man. My grandmother had a lot of hopes and dreams for me that I let her down. And over that 17 years, man, that I was incarcerated, that's all I was thinking about was, how can I come home and make her proud? And that's why I committed to educating myself. That's why I committed to, you know, preparing myself. Um, and that's really, my why, man. That's what drives me to this day. I know she's looking down at me. I know she's proud of me. She used to always say to me, no weapon formed against you shall prosper. Um, and she used to follow that up with, I'm not saying that the weapon won't form. I'm just saying that it won't prosper. And that's something that I hold as I go about this journey called life. As I experience various trials and tribulations, that's what keeps me planted, is that, yeah, life is going to happen. But what matters is how you respond to life happening. And I think, the way that I've responded to the doors of employers slamming in my face, is something that she would be very proud of, because here I am in a position where I'm working for a national organization, where I am doing purpose driven work, where I am following my passion, where I have the ability to disrupt the system that has not only caused a great deal of harm to myself and my family and my community, but countless others.
Yeah.
Man, that's powerful. You about to
Beautiful.
make me start singing, man. No weapon.
Stop.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yep,
I had
that's real, man.
I had a little bit of a follow-up question to that. Just with, kind of about reintegration, about what that looks like, and kind of like what are some ways that reintegration is not being handled well, and then maybe some things that there could be done to help with that for people who are leaving, those situations. And just because I know that there can be more that can be done, and I'm interested to hear like what maybe you think would be better that they could do to set people up for success.
Absolutely. So when individuals are re-entering society after a period of incarceration, there's three things that, in my opinion, and also data supports this, that they need to successfully reintegrate. They need adequate housing. They need employment that pays a livable wage, and they also need transportation from A to B. I think the way that we begin to ensure that impacted individuals are able to successfully reintegrate into society, I think we remove the box, ban the box. I'm sure you all have heard about campaigns called ban the box, where we remove the box from applications that asks if an individual is a convicted felon. In various states across the country, that has been done. However, that doesn't prevent an employer from Googling someone and getting all of this information off of Google of what this person's background is, or why there's a gap in a person's employment history. There's still ways around the banning of the box implementation that employers go around that prevents formerly incarcerated individuals from securing employment that pays a livable wage. And so in the immediate, I will continue to echo and call for equitable hiring practices that does not look at an individual's previous lived experience as spending a period of time in a carceral setting. I will continue to advocate for the employer to look at the individual who is sitting across from them and whether or not they are capable of executing the task that they are going to give them. That is one area that I think will begin to reduce the recidivism rate. That is one area that I think will contribute to successful reintegration, because if an individual has employment that pays them a livable wage, they don't have to engage in activities that is going to lead them back to a prison setting. Secondly, housing. If we had landlords who are more inclined to renting out their properties to individuals with this lived experience and not holding what they did 5, 10, 15 years ago against them, that will also contribute to the recidivism rate remaining low. And then transportation is also an issue that impacted individuals face upon reentry. And so those three areas, I will say, are easy lifts. You know, they're really easy lifts. And although I didn't really experience a great deal of, you know, lack of housing, lack of transportation, I did experience the discrimination in employment, but I had that family support that allowed me to overcome that discrimination from employers. And not only did I have that family support that allowed me to overcome the discrimination of employers, I also had something deep down inside of me that said, despite the obstacles that they are throwing in front of me, I'm going to overcome this, and I am going to succeed no matter what. And so individuals have to have something in themselves that says, I know I'm going to face barriers, discrimination, prejudice, but I'm not going to allow those things to prevent me from successfully re-entering society and accomplishing a life of success. Because that's what it all boils down to. It all boils down to individuals having access to opportunity that will contribute to them being successful. Yeah. And with me, I had the will, I had a fire lit up under me. I had a promise that I made to my grandmother that I was not going to succumb to the barriers, the roadblocks, the obstacles. I wasn't going to succumb to none of those things. I was going to overcome those things and be a success. And that's why I'm sitting in front of you all today, because I made that commitment to my grandmother prior to me stepping foot on what they call the free world. Before I even was released from a correctional setting, I said to my grandmother that I was going to do X, Y, and Z. I said to myself I was going to do these things. I said to the my fellow captives that I was going to do these things. I said to correctional officers that I was going to do these things. And although they looked upon me doubtfully, now they're looking at me and saying, hey, you said you were going to do these things. And I'm proud of you that you're doing those things. And so to hear that only galvanizes me to continue to go harder than I've ever gone, because I know that there's individuals who are coming out of a carceral setting and need this type of inspiration to succeed after serving a decade, 5 years, or more in a carceral setting.
Yeah. So I would imagine that a lot of the work that you're doing now is dedicated to what you just talked about, which is helping young men and women who come out of the incarceral system to kind of reintegrate back into society. So if you could just tell us a little bit about the work that you do with Dream, tell us about the aims of Dream and kind of how you got involved with them and what you're doing with Dream.
Absolutely. So at dream.org, our mission is to close prison doors and open doors of opportunity. And the way that we do that is by building and training up leaders and getting them access to tools and resources that will allow them to scale their advocacy at the local, state, and federal level. And so we are essentially conveners and collaborators. We convene issue area experts to have dialogues around the problems that we face as a society as it pertains to mass incarceration, as it pertains to pollution or climate justice, as well as it pertains to equity within the tech sector. And so we bring together these experts who are proximate to the issues that we work on and get them access to tools and resources that challenges the very issues that they are facing and that we are facing as a society, to dismantle and disrupt those things. We are working with any and everyone who is committed to solving the problems that we are faced with as a society. We are ultimately committed to dreaming of a world beyond mass incarceration, pollution, and poverty. And we understand that in order to solve these problems, we have to not only get proximate to these issues, but we have to also ensure that individuals who are proximate to these issues, voices and leadership are centered and elevated. And so as the organizing director on the justice program at dream.org, I'm tasked with building nationwide capacity to pass transformational legislation at the local, state, and federal level that will reduce the footprint of incarceration. And so we're doing that by training up leaders with tools and skill sets around directly engaging elected officials, around organizing constituencies, around sharing their stories, around interacting with the media, around doing digital engagement, digital organizing to educate and inform the general public of what the criminal legal system is and what it does, and why people in society should be concerned about how their tax dollars are being used to incapacitate individuals and not rehabilitate individuals. We are working on climate justice. There are billions of tax dollars that have been allocated within the climate justice sector that is not being funneled into marginalized communities. We're working to ensure that these dollars are funneled into the communities that are most impacted. We are working in our tech program to ensure that pathways of employment are being created that are equitable for Black and brown people, as well as for formerly incarcerated individuals. That is what our organization is working on, the 3 issue areas that we're working in. And again, we are an organization of innovative leaders who are committed to working with any and everyone that recognizes the problem, but more than recognizing the problem, who they also are individuals who have fallen in love with the solutions that are viable.
That's powerful. That is, for sure, for sure. So moving forward, how do you see tech not anti-pollution, but how do you see those things working together, right? So you got on the website, it said green, which representing a green earth, green way of living. Then you had justice, and you had tech. Those aren't 3 things that I would immediately think to connect to each other. So kind of putting all those together, how do they work together, and why did you choose those 3 things to kind of be the center point of dream.org?
So I've been at this organization for 2 years now. And prior to my arrival here, these 3 programs work individual of one another. But over the last 2 years, we've come together as one organization who are working in these 3 issue areas. And so, as our website says, like for our Green for All program, like, you know, we understand that the climate issue, we understand that it threatens our health. For example, here I am in Atlanta, Georgia. I have asthma, and I received a notification on my phone that said the air quality was level orange or something. And individuals that has asthma and heart conditions should, limit their outside activities. And so, hearing that, reading that, and thinking about the work that we do as an organization, most people don't understand the severity of the climate crisis that we as a society are faced with. It threatens our health. It threatens our communities, and it also impacts our pocketbooks. And as a result of that, how do we, 1, educate people, and 2, how do we activate people to ensure that policymakers and elected officials are doing everything in their power to ensure that we have access to government dollars that will begin to improve our air quality, that will improve our neighborhoods, that they aren't dumping grounds for waste. That's the climate issue that we are tackling right now. Mm-hmm. In our tech program, we're working with tech companies to figure out how do we create a pathway of employment for marginalized communities to secure jobs. How do we secure a pathway of employment for formerly incarcerated individuals to secure employment within this sector? And what that looks like is us having conversations with tech company executives about their hiring practices. What is your second chance hiring practices look like? What is your hiring practices look like for marginalized communities? Are you posting? Are your job postings inclusive? Are your job postings speaking to individuals who are representatives of marginalized communities? And if they aren't, here's how we can help you as an organization that is proximate to this community and individuals that have an interest in this sector.
I love that. That's powerful. That is very powerful.
Yeah.
And that's something that's go ahead.
Go ahead. No. I was just going to say,
you got
on like the HR side at a organization, like these are things that some companies, hopefully all, are like genuinely trying to work towards and like be better at. Something that I'm always where my job tries to really be good on is like hiring for skill, rather than like arbitrary like markers of like what someone can do, right? Like, can you show that you have the ability to do the task? Do you have experience, right? Are we willing to take people who seem like they'd be a good fit, even if they aren't even meeting this whatever requirement that other people would say they need to have? And so this is hopefully these types of things need to trickle down to like corporate. I mean, just because that genuinely impacts someone's everyday as well as the way like policy does. Policies influence the way that organizations that are making money interact with individuals.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Nate.
For sure.
Sorry.
Oh, I was gonna say something similar, but I was gonna say, you're the vein that you're in, working in HR, you probably have more access to that kind of thing. But I think it's super important that people have a pathway to employment in those sectors. A lot of times, they talk about it's not what you know, it's who you know, right? And there are a lot of people who excel in certain areas, but don't necessarily get the same opportunities because of maybe where they come from, or because they didn't go to a school that had resources for them. One of the things that I think about a lot is the story of Bill Gates, and how one of the reasons it was in the book Outliers, which is kind of a controversial theory, but Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. He talks about how the potential reason that Bill Gates was able to set himself up for success was because he went to a private school where he had access to computers a long time before anybody else had access to computers. And that kind of set him up to kind of know what he was doing before computers became mainstream, and thus allowed him to kind of get ahead of the game. And with a lot of things in the tech sector, a lot of schools in lower income areas are not going to have the same access to opportunities or access to technology as would a school in a higher socioeconomic status area. So creating those kinds of opportunities for employment is super important, both for kids who are in school right now, and then also for people who are coming out of the criminal legal system to be able to go into those areas as well, because you can learn a lot and you can do a lot. And one thing that we've seen is that you don't really need a college degree to get into the technology sector. You don't really need that much of an education. You just need the ability to work through problems and the ability to understand technology, and you can do a lot with that.
Absolutely. And to that point, most of our cohort graduates, I can't recall the salary that our cohort graduates in our tech program earn, but I would say I'm if I'm not mistaken, they're earning anywhere from, their starting salary is like $60,000-$70,000 starting salary, with an average salary increase of anywhere from 20 to 40,000. And so we understand that, yeah, a degree is not necessary in order to earn this type of money in the tech sector. Like, if you know how to read and understand code and navigate a laptop or a computer, like, you are able to access this salary band within the tech sector. And so we want to make sure that we're giving Black and brown communities access to this skill set, so that they will qualify for a salary at that starting base pay. That's something that we're very intentional in doing. And we understand that Black and brown people don't have access to the schooling that a Bill Gates have access to, or people that Bill Gates had access to, or the communities that Bill Gates grew up in and had access to. We understand that that is not something that is prevalent in Black and brown communities. And because it's not prevalent, what do we as an organization do? What is our responsibility? Our responsibility is proximity. Not only proximity, but also ensuring that those voices are elevated, amplified, and centered to ensure that we are continuing to create a pipeline, not based off of our own assumption of what is right, what is wrong, what is not happening, but based off of the guidance and information that we receive from individuals that are from these communities that don't have access to these opportunities to take advantage of.
That's powerful. I love that. And that's very, very important. So to just kind of wrap everything up with one last question, what are your hopes for your work with dream.org? What are your hopes for the criminal legal system? What are you, if you could create an ideal world where things were as you wanted it to be in regards to the work that you're doing, what would that look like?
I'll go back to and it's on our website, but I'll go back to what we dream. We dream of a world beyond mass incarceration. We dream of a world beyond economic inequality. And we also dream of a world where we work for cleaner air, cleaner water, affordable energy, and good jobs for everyone. We dream of a world, like I said early in the podcast. We dream of a world beyond pollution, poverty, and mass incarceration. In an ideal world, those things would not exist. Pollution wouldn't exist. Mass incarceration wouldn't exist. Inequitable employment or hiring practices would not exist. That's what an ideal world for dream.org looks like. And so that's what my response will be, is that we dream of a world beyond poverty, pollution, and mass incarceration. We dream of a world where we all are at the table discussing viable solutions that is going to move us forward as a society, that is going to keep us together and not keep us divided. We're going to work together collaboratively, understanding that it's going to take all of us and not some of us. It's going to take all of us stepping outside of our silos and coming to the table with solutions, being solution oriented to the issues that we are faced with and deal with as a society.
Love that. And I know you touched on that quite a bit throughout, but I just had to have you sum it up one more time because it was beautiful. So, Sean, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast and for sharing the work that you're doing, for sharing your story. We're really grateful for that and being able to learn from your experience. We're going to wrap it up with some recommendations. Rachel, you want to go first?
Yes, I actually have a really good recommendation. Okay, give me a second to get this paper of what it is. I want to make sure I say it right. Oh my gosh, I should have had this prepared. Okay, because my recommendation for this week is it's a mental health journal that I bought off of TikTok from somebody. Oh my gosh, I'll just put it in the notes because I can't find the piece of paper. It was just here. Anyway, the journal basically is each day you will go through and you write what you're feeling, what you're thinking about. You rate your day. You talk about what you've done for self-care or self-love, what you're grateful for, and what you're just thinking about, positive or negative. And then if it's negative, it makes you write down your next steps. I'm very big on mental health and working on that just because this has been a rough season for me in my personal life. And so my therapist, I told her about this and she started talking to me about how there's actually a lot of research around if you write down, if you verbalize 3 things you're grateful for, there's research around that can just really help you. And I know a lot of us disassociate from certain experiences that we're having just to kind of survive. being able to write it down does allow you to like process, and like it does allow you to relax, even if you just write it down. And can take away some anxiety that you might not even be aware of. So I recommend it just because I'm not a good person to do this on my own. I need structure. I need someone to remind me. So I have the notebook sitting on my right next to my bed, and I forget about it until I see it right before I go to bed when I plug my phone in. And so I just write in it, and it's helped me a lot in the past week or two. Just with everything that I've had going on, it's really been helpful to just sit and like actually think, because it's really easy to not think, just when you're dealing with a lot going on in life. And so having an opportunity to sit and think, it's been very helpful. And even if you aren't having a hard time in life, it's still a good thing to be aware of, like, oh, let me actually check in with my body. Let me check in with what I'm feeling. Let me check in with what the day was like for me. They seem like really small things and can be insignificant, but I've been very shocked on the big impact that it's had on me. So that is my recommendation for the week.
Love that. Love that. Love that. All right. My recommendation for the week. I don't know if I've recommended this before. I don't think I have, but I am going to recommend that y'all watch the Black Lady Sketch Show on HBO Max. I've been watching that for the last couple months now, on and off, but it's a great way to get a laugh. It's great humor. It's fun. It's just kind of silly. There's a lot of different little sketch comedy shows out there, but there are none that are made, by Black women. So it's a great way to support Black women, but also just a great way to be entertained. There's a little something in there for everybody. It's a very entertaining show. So it's on HBO Max, or I guess it's just Max now. The Black Lady Sketch Show. That's my recommendation for this week. Mr. Wilson, what would you recommend to our listeners?
I will recommend to your listeners to text empathy to 97483. And when you text empathy to 97483, you will join a network of committed individuals who may or may not be impacted by the criminal legal system. They may or they may not be crime survivors. They may or they may not be individuals who are allies and want to see the criminal legal system change for the better. This is a community and a network of individuals who are committed to transformational change within not only the criminal legal system, but all systems that affect us and prevent us from living our lives to our fullest potential. So that is something that I would recommend to your listening audience. If you are looking for a community that is of like mind of yourself and who are committed to bringing about transformational change, I encourage you to text empathy to 97483.
There you go. You heard it here first. And people are always reaching out to us, asking what they can do to help, where they can go to learn more.
Mm-hmm.
Sean Wilson is giving it to you. So be sure to text us. We'll make sure to put it in the show notes so that there's no excuse. If you are one of those people that's looking for ways to help, looking for ways to educate yourselves, this is one of the ways you can do that. So Sean, thank you for sharing that, brother.
Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And again, yeah, thank you so much, Sean, for today. This has been an enlightening episode. I love when we have just different people from different walks of life, different experiences on a podcast, just because I just love opening up our listeners' minds, my own mind, and knowing that working towards making society more equitable, it's a big feat. But there's a lot of us all doing our own thing, our own version of like foot soldiers going out and trying to make change in our own communities and in our own ways. And you're definitely making an impact. And so thank you. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yes. But to close us out, I'm just going to remind listeners, if there are any stories that you guys want to share with us or people that you want to be interviewed, please email us at blackmenacepodcast at gmail.com. And please follow us on all of our platforms on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. We are the Black Menaces. And on YouTube, it is the Black Menaces. And then we would appreciate, like we always say in every episode, this is what we do in our free time. We do this because we care about it and we're passionate. And if you want to support us in any way, you can donate with our monthly donations, which is you just go on theblackmenace.org/donate. And you can go and set up either a one-time or a monthly donation And we also have our merch is still up and available. You can get our shirts as well as stickers and anything else, which is also at the blackmenace.org/store. And then we also have our Venmo, which is the Black Menaces. So again, any support that we receive from you guys helps us to continue to share stories like Sean and to continue to just help educate the world and helping it to become a better place. So thank you again.
Perfect. And with that, we will catch y'all next week. Peace.